And as a nation, as part of the solution, we need to stop fooling ourselves about how well or how poorly I think we're doing. For example, we impose our own standards, and standards are absolutely essential if we hope to improve. We impose our own standards state by state in such basic areas as reading or math. And what that's led to, in order for some states to make themselves look good, fortunately not our state, some states have begun lowering the standards so much that it's become a race to the bottom. If you take the state that has the highest percentage of students passing the state standard, that's the state is in first place by that criteria. That same state is in last place by the national standards. And heavens knows where they'd be by international standards. Bill Gates has summarized this situation by saying, when I compare our high schools with what I see when I'm traveling abroad, I'm terrified for our workforce of tomorrow. That's K through 12. Let me briefly turn to the supply of scientists, engineers, and mathematicians, which has also proven challenging, in part because of what I've just mentioned. During the last 2 decades, it's part of an era of the greatest explosion of science and technology probably in history. During those 2 decades, the number of engineers and scientists and mathematicians that we graduate has declined by 20%. The number of engineers getting PhDs has declined by 34% during that time. Of the 3 undergraduate universities that provide the students to U.S. universities that receive the most PhDs in engineering and science in the U.S., those 3 undergraduate institutions, 2 are in China, 1's in Korea. The United States now ranks 60th among all nations, 17th among developed nations in the fraction of bachelor's degrees that go to math, science, or engineering. China today is graduating more English-speaking engineers than we do in this country. Ironically, and I don't mean to be picking on the Washington Post today particularly, but in a recent story they had, the head of the title headline was "How to Get Good Grades in College." Subtitle was "Don't Study Engineering." Unfortunately, not a message that we'd like to have. General Electric's chairman and CEO, Jeff Immelt, was speaking to a group of politicians in Washington a while back, and he made the following comment, and I quote him. I quote him here because the National Academies wouldn't let me quote him in our report. He said, "We had more sports exercise majors graduate than electrical engineering graduates last year. If you want to become the massage capital of the world, you're well on your way." In most developing countries, careers in science, engineering, and math are viewed as the door to a better life. They're viewed with high prestige. George Hallmeyer, the former director of the Defense Research Advanced Projects Agency, was in Russia not long ago. And he sent me an email, and he said he had just gone to a movie. He said he always likes to go to movies in Russia because in Russia, the engineer always gets the girl. But George was in it. I should mention to you, too, I met my wife when I was in engineering school. But she tells me the odds were good, but the goods were odd. This brings me, though, to a more serious problem that was buried in George's comment. And that is, all too seldom, the engineer a girl, a woman. Only 20% of the time in the case of bachelor's degrees, 17% of the time in the case of PhDs. And if you talk about minority groups in this country, if you take African Americans, 12% of the population, Hispanic Americans, 12% of the population, each produce less than 5% of the bachelor's in engineering and far less than that of the PhDs. And if we're going to lose the talents of half the people in the country, how are we going to compete with nations that are 4 times our size? The truth of it all is that America's science and engineering enterprise would barely function were it not for foreign individuals, foreign-born individuals who've come to our country and contributed so mightily here. If you look at the PhD workforce in science and engineering in America today, under age 45, which is the most the ages at which people contribute the most in those fields, if you look at that workforce, 52% of them were foreign born. Yahoo's co-founder, Jerry Yang, has said, and I quote him, "Yahoo would not be an American company today if the United States had not welcomed my family and me almost 30 years ago." Today, many of our policies not only are not very welcoming to these folks, particularly to come and get their educations, but we do everything we can to encourage them to leave once they get their education. The global balance of power in science and technology could change so quickly. I like the story that Craig Barrett, who was chairman and CEO of Intel, told our group on the Gathering Storm Committee that, speaking of Intel, that 90% of their revenues on the last day of a year come from products that didn't exist on the first day of that same year. That's how quickly they have to reinvent themselves. Well, the Gathering Storm was released 2 years ago, and I suppose you could say that a lot was accomplished during those first 2 years. For example, a new research university was founded with a $10 billion opening day endowment. It took MIT 142 years to build that kind of an endowment. The following year, 200,000 students studied abroad, mostly paid for by the government, mostly in the fields of math and science and engineering. A Global Nanotechnology Center was established, funded by our government. The world's most powerful particle accelerator began to operate. Accelerators that throughout their history have been built in this country. The President ordered that $3 billion be added to the science budget, and a high-level commission conducted a follow-up study to the Gathering Storm with a specific objective of creating jobs at home. Now, the problem with those steps that were taken after our report was issued was that they didn't take place in the United States. They took place in Saudi Arabia, China, the UK, India, Switzerland, Russia, and Australia, respectively. So what about the United States? President Bush included our report findings in his State of the Union address. The Congress, in the authorization process, passed the bill to implement our suggestions by a vote of 88 to 8 in the Senate, 397 to 20 in the House. This is during an election year, mind you, 3 years ago. But due to an avalanche, partly an avalanche of earmarks, 9,800 earmarks in that bill, plus what I would describe as a breakdown of the legislative system, the last couple of days we lost our money to implement the authorization that had been approved by those overwhelming votes. The good news is that thanks to people such as you in this room, and thanks to the strong support of President Obama, we now have in the stimulus package strong support for many of the recommendations, funding for the recommendations proposed by the national academies. Now what we have to do is be sure we can sustain that support, because the worst thing we could do is have a stimulus package and then 2 years from now fall off the cliff. So we've got to start building now so that we don't just have a brief bright spot.